Hello, and welcome. Find a comfortable position, settle in under the weight of your blankets, and allow the sounds of the present to fade away. There is nothing required of you now but to rest, to listen, and to let your mind drift back in time. Tonight, we leave our modern world behind. We will not be visiting the grand halls of kings or the gilded chambers of emperors. Instead, our journey takes us north, to the cold, rugged coastlines of Scandinavia during the age of the Norsemen. We often think of this era in flashes of violence, of dragon-headed ships crashing ashore and axes raised in fury. And while those moments are part of the story, they are but a fleeting, thunderous storm passing over a vast and enduring landscape. The true story, the deeper story, lies in the quiet rhythm of daily life, in the struggle and the stillness that defined existence for most. So, breathe in and out. Let the gentle cadence of our story be your guide. We will travel together into the heart of a Viking settlement, not as warriors, but as quiet observers, watching the turning of a single, long year through the eyes of those who lived it. Let us begin our journey. Imagine yourself awakening, not to an alarm, but to a subtle shift in the darkness. The long, central fire pit, the lifeblood of the home, has been fed its first logs of the day. It glows weakly, casting long, flickering shadows against the curved timber walls. The air you breathe is thick, a complex tapestry of scents. There is the lingering smell of wood smoke, so deeply infused into the structure that it has become part of the wood itself. Beneath that is the scent of sleeping bodies, of wool, of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, and the close, earthy aroma of the livestock who share this space with you, slumbering in their stalls at one end of the great hall. This single, long room is your entire world. This is the beginning of a day in early spring. The long, brutal winter, which they called Veta, is finally loosening its grip. But there is no celebration, no great sigh of relief, only the quiet, pressing knowledge of the work that lies ahead. The survival of your family, of your entire village, depends on the frantic, ceaseless activity of the next few months. You rise from your sleeping platform, your deerskin blanket pulled tight against the lingering chill. The floor beneath your bare feet is hard-packed earth, cold and damp. Every movement is deliberate, meant to conserve warmth and energy. Around you, the longhouse slowly stirs. Children, huddled together for warmth, begin to murmur. The quiet, rhythmic sound of a mother comforting a restless infant is a constant, gentle undercurrent. The first task is always the animals. The few cows, the sheep, and the goats that survive the winter are gaunt, their ribs visible beneath their shaggy coats. Their fodder, carefully rationed hay and dried leaves, is nearly gone. Taking them out to the new pastures is a risk. The ground is still hard, the grass sparse and pale, but they must eat. Their milk is a precious resource, and the calves and lambs they will soon bear are the future of the farm. Breakfast is a simple, repetitive affair. A thin porridge of oats or barley, perhaps with a spoonful of preserved berries stirred in for the children. It's warm, but it does little to truly fill the gnawing emptiness in your stomach, an emptiness that has been a constant companion since the stores began to dwindle in the deepest, darkest days of winter. As the sun, a pale disk in a gray sky, climbs higher, the work begins in earnest. The fields, hardened by frost, must be broken. This is back-breaking labor. You walk behind a simple wooden plow, perhaps tipped with iron if your family is fortunate, pulled by a tired ox, or, just as often, by the sheer strength of your own family members. The soil is rocky and unforgiving. Every stone must be pulled from the earth by hand. Your muscles ache with a deep, familiar pain, and the cold wind cuts across the open fields, chapping your skin. The days are lengthening, a welcome change, but it only means more hours for work. The women's tasks are just as relentless. The wool from the spring shearing must be cleaned, carded, and spun. The rhythmic whir of the drop spindle is a sound that will echo through the longhouse for months, a constant hum of productivity. They will spend countless hours at the warp-weighted loom, its vertical frame leaning against a wall, their hands skillfully weaving the coarse, durable cloth, the VA that will clothe the family and serve as a form of currency. Food preservation is a constant worry. The first wild herbs and greens are a treasure, carefully gathered to supplement the meager diet. Fish, caught in the nearby fjord, must be gutted, salted, or hung to dry in the wind. Silvery bodies that will sustain you when other sources fail. Nothing is wasted. Every part of an animal, every edible plant, is used. This is the fundamental reality of your life. A constant struggle to capture and store the fleeting abundance of summer, to survive the inevitable scarcity of winter. The ambient sounds shift to those of summer. The buzz of insects, the distant bleating of sheep, the sound of children laughing as they play near the water's edge. The visuals showed lush green fields and a brighter, warmer sun. Summer Sumar arrives not as a gentle season of leisure, but as an intensification of labor. The days are long, stretching into the twilight of the midnight sun. Sleep feels like a luxury you cannot afford. The crops barley, rye, oats, and perhaps some hardy vegetables like cabbage and beans need constant weeding. Hay must be cut in the high meadows, raked, and left to dry in the sun before being gathered and stored for the winter ahead. This is a race against the weather. A sudden summer storm can ruin a season's worth of animal fodder. It is also the raiding season. While your settlement is primarily a farming community, the men are never truly just farmers. They are warriors in waiting. The threat is a constant, low thrum of anxiety. It may not be a great army that comes, but a longship from a neighboring chieftain, seeking to supplement his own stores by taking yours. The men practice with their spears, their shields, and a heavy axe that is as much a tool for clearing timber as it is a weapon. Children learn to fight, to be vigilant. A distant sail on the horizon is a cause for alarm, not excitement. Life is precarious. A single raid could undo a year of relentless toil, leaving your family to face the winter with empty hands and broken spirits. Infant mortality is a grim, accepted reality. A five, a difficult birth, a season of poor milk. These are often death sentences for the youngest. The loss is mourned, a deep and private sorrow, but it is a common sorrow. Life is a fragile gift, easily extinguished. The emotional landscape is one of resilience and a quiet, stoic acceptance of hardship. The visuals shift again. The light becomes golden. The leaves on the few hardy trees begin to turn yellow and red. The sounds are of harvesting, the swish of scythes through grain, and a more urgent wind. Autumn, husk, is the culmination of the year's struggle. The harvest is a frantic time. Everyone, from the oldest to the youngest child who can walk, is in the fields. The grain is cut with iron sickles, bundled into sheaves, and brought back to the longhouse. It must be threshed to separate the grain from the stalk, and then ground into flour using a heavy, hand-turned quern stone. The repetitive, grinding motion of stone on stone, hour after hour, is the sound of survival. This is also the time of slaughter. The animals that will not be kept over the winter are killed. This is a grim but necessary task. The meat is smoked high in the rafters of the longhouse, salted in great wooden barrels, or dried into tough strips. The blood is used for puddings, the hides for clothing and leather goods, the bones for tools and needles. Once again, nothing is wasted. The longhouse fills with the metallic scent of blood and the acrid smell of smoke, a potent combination that signals the coming darkness. The bounty is reassuring, but it is finite. You count your barrels of salted fish, your sacks of flour, your smoked hams, and you wonder, will it be enough? The sounds transition to the howling of a fierce wind, the crackle of a large, roaring fire, and the deep silence of a snow-covered world. The visuals showed the longhouse almost entirely buried in snow, only the roof and smoke hole visible. And then, winter returns. The world outside shrinks, buried under a deep blanket of snow. The darkness is profound, the days merely a few hours of gray twilight. The family is now confined to the longhouse for weeks, sometimes months on end. The great central fire is now never allowed to die. The smoke is thicker than ever, stinging your eyes and coating your throat. The air is dense with the smells of unwashed bodies, cooking, and the close proximity of the animals, whose warmth is now a vital secondary heat source. Time seems to slow down. The relentless physical labor of the summer is replaced by the quiet, indoor tasks. Tools are mended, axe heads are sharpened, leather is treated and stitched. The women weave and sew, their hands always busy. But there is also time for stories. In the long, dark evenings, an elder might recount the saga styles of gods, heroes, and great battles. These stories are more than entertainment. They are a connection to your ancestors, a lesson in honor, and a reminder of your place in the vast cyclical story of your people. But the winter is also a time of great peril. The stored food dwindles, day by day. The cold is a physical presence, seeping through the turf walls, and sickness can spread rapidly through the close-packed inhabitants of the longhouse. A cough in the darkness can signal the beginning of the end for the weak or the elderly. The struggle is no longer against the earth, but against the suffocating confinement, the gnawing hunger, and the deep, abiding darkness. You huddle by the fire, listening to the wind howl like a hungry wolf outside, and you dream of the sun. You dream of the spring, and you wait, hoping you have done enough to see it again. This is the rhythm of your life. A year spent in a constant, quiet struggle for survival in a world both beautiful and brutal. The life we have just witnessed, that of the farmer bound to the seasonal cycle, was the reality for the vast majority of Norse people. It was a life of deep roots, of connection to ancestral land. Yet, for some, this life was not enough. For some, a fiery spirit, a thirst for renown, or the simple, hard pressure of a growing population on limited land pushed them outwards. They looked to the sea not just as a source of food, but as a path to fortune, to new beginnings, or, in some cases, as the only road left to them. Our story now turns to one such man, a figure whose legacy is written not in the soil of a farm, but on the icy expanse of the great Western Ocean. His name was Thorvaldsen, but history would remember him by the color of his hair and the heat of his temper. Erik the Red. Erik was born in Norway around the year 950. His story, as it has come down to us through the Icelandic sagas, begins as so many Norse tales do, with violence. His father, Thorvald Asvald's son, was exiled from Norway for months, and so the family sailed west, making a new home on the stark, volcanic shores of Iceland, a land already settled by Norsemen seeking freedom from the growing power of the Norwegian kings. It seems, however, that Erik inherited his father's contentious nature. He was described as a man of great ambition and pride, quick to take offense and quicker to seek retribution. Imagine him now, a powerful man in a new land, carving out a life for himself. He marries a woman of good standing and establishes his own farm, but trouble follows him. A dispute with a neighbor over borrowed farm equipment escalates tragically. Servants are killed. In retaliation, Erik kills the men responsible. The cycle of blood feud, a cornerstone of this society of honor and vengeance, had begun. The local assembly, the Thing, was convened to pass judgment. For these killings, Erik the Red was declared an outlaw and banished from his district. He moved his family to another part of Iceland, but his fiery spirit could not be contained. Another conflict, this time over sacred high-seat pillars he had entrusted to a fellow farmer, led to more bloodshed. Once again, Erik found himself facing the judgment of his peers, of the powerful All-Thing. This time, the sentence was more severe. He was declared a full outlaw, banished from all of Iceland for 3 years. He was a man without a home, without the protection of the law. For any other man, this might have been the end. For Erik, it was a beginning. He could not go east, back to Norway, so he would look west. For years, sailors had whispered tales, stories of a vast, mysterious land far to the west of Iceland, first sighted decades earlier by a mariner named Gunnbjorn Olfsson, who had been blown off course. It was a land of myth and shadow, uncharted and unknown. For the outlawed Erik the Red, this unknown was not a threat, but an opportunity. During his 3 years of exile, he decided he would sail into that emptiness and find this rumored land for himself. The ambient sounds deepen. The lapping of water becomes the surge of open ocean waves. We hear the snap of a sail in the wind, and the groan of a ship's timbers under strain. The visuals show a single longship, its square, sail full, navigating a vast, gray, and empty sea under an overcast sky. The journey was a monumental undertaking. You must picture the vessel, a Nair, a sturdier, wider cousin of the raiding longship, built not for speed and war, but for cargo and it was an open boat, exposed to the brutal weather of the North Atlantic. There was no compass, no cabin, no comfort. Navigation was a matter of immense skill and instinct. Erik and his small crew would have used the position of the sun on a clear day, the stars at night, the flight patterns of birds, the color and swell of the water itself. They were sailing into a void on the map, a journey of immense faith and courage. After days at sea, they found it. A coastline appeared, a formidable sight of towering glaciers and barren, rocky shores. He had reached the eastern coast of what we now call Greenland, but it was inhospitable, a wall of ice. So he sailed south, rounding the southern tip of this immense island, and found what he was looking for: deep fjords that cut into the land, creating sheltered areas where the landscape was, in the brief summer, surprisingly green. For the 3 years of his exile, Erik explored this new world. He found pastures for livestock, areas that seemed viable for settlement. He faced no native people, as the island's previous inhabitants had vanished centuries before, and the ancestors of the modern Inuit had not yet migrated so far south. He was the master of a vast, silent continent, and when his 3 years of exile were complete, he sailed back to Iceland, his mind alight with a plan. He needed settlers. A land is not a colony until people live there, and he could not do it alone. And so Erik, the canny leader, deployed his greatest tool, not his axe, but his words. He called the new land. He knew that people would be more tempted to go there if it had an attractive name. It was one of the most successful marketing campaigns in history. He painted a picture of a land of opportunity, a place of rolling green pastures, a fresh start for those feeling crowded in Iceland. And it worked. The sagas tell us that 25 ships, filled with men, women, children, and their essential livestock, set sail from Iceland with Erik to colonize Greenland. The journey was perilous. Only 14 of those ships completed the voyage. The unforgiving Atlantic claimed the others, a grim reminder of the risks involved. But for those who arrived, a new life began. They established 2 main settlements along the sheltered western fjords, the larger eastern settlement, where Erik built his own estate, and the smaller western settlement, further up the coast. Their lives there were a magnified version of the struggle we witnessed earlier. The growing season was even shorter than in Iceland. Crops like barley were incredibly difficult to grow. They survived primarily on what the land and sea offered. They became hunters, relying on caribou and, most importantly, seals. The seal provided meat, fat for fuel and light, and waterproof skins. They also hunted walrus, not for food, but for their ivory tusks, which became Greenland's primary export. This ivory, a precious commodity in Europe, was their fragile link to the world they had left behind. Their only way to trade for the iron, timber, and grain they could not produce themselves. Erik the Red, the fiery outlaw, became a great chieftain, the undisputed leader of this new Norse society on the edge of the world. He lived out his days there, a figure of immense authority. His children would become even more famous. His son, Leif Erikson, becoming the first European to stand on the shores of North America. But the Greenland colony, born from Erik's ambition, lived on a knife's edge. For several centuries, they survived, a tiny outpost of European culture in the vast Arctic. They built churches, established a bishopric, and maintained their fragile trade link with Norway. But the world was changing around them. The climate began to cool in what is now known as the Little Ice Age. The sea ice grew, making the journey from Europe more treacherous and eventually impossible. Their own environment became harsher, the pastures shrinking, the hunting more difficult. Their last contact with Europe seems to have been in the early 15th century. After that, silence. When explorers reached the sites of the settlements again centuries later, they found only ruin. The churches were crumbling, the farmsteads empty. The fate of the Greenland Norse remains one of history's poignant mysteries. Did they stop? Were they assimilated or wiped out by the migrating Thule people? Did they make one last, desperate attempt to sail away? We do not know for sure. The saga that began with Erik the Red's fiery ambition ends in a quiet, frozen mystery, a testament to the incredible resilience and the ultimate fragility of these Norse adventurers who dared to make a home on the very edge of the known world. The story of Erik the Red, and indeed the entire Viking Age, could not have been written without one singular piece of technology. It was the tool that unlocked the world for the Norse people, the key that opened the sea lanes from the frozen shores of Greenland to the warm rivers of the Middle East. It was more than a boat. It was a masterpiece of naval engineering, a work of art, and a symbol of power so potent that its silhouette on the horizon could change the course of history. Tonight, we look closely at the secrets of the Viking longship. For a long time, our understanding of these incredible vessels was pieced together from fleeting descriptions in texts and the stylized images carved on roofs. But in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a series of astonishing discoveries in Norway gave us a direct window into this past. Farmers, digging into large burial mounds on their land, uncovered not just the treasures and bones of the dead, but the very ships that had carried them to their final rest. Imagine a field in Gokstad, Norway, in the year 1880, as workers dig into a mound known locally as the King's Mound. Their shovels strike timber. Carefully, they excavate, and what emerges from the blue clay that has preserved it for 1,000 years is a ship, a nearly perfectly preserved Viking ship, over 23 meters, or 76 feet, long. The Gokstead ship is a stunning example of a working vessel. It is robust, built for the sea, with a high bow and stern. You can still see the holes for 32 oars and the remnants of the mast. Standing before it, you can feel its power, its readiness for the open ocean. It was a ship like this that carried Erik and his followers across the treacherous North Atlantic. Then, a few decades later, near Oseberg, another mound revealed a vessel of even greater beauty. The Oseberg ship is slightly smaller and exquisitely decorated. Its prow and stern curl upwards into elegant, coiling serpents, their surfaces covered in breathtakingly intricate carvings of gripping, intertwining beasts. It was a vessel of immense prestige, a stately yacht likely used for travel along the coast by the two high-ranking women who were buried within it, surrounded by a wealth of grave goods. The Oseberg ship shows us that these vessels were not just functional tools. They were the ultimate expression of wealth, power, and artistry. The visuals slowly pan over detailed replicas or CGI renderings of these ships, focusing on the construction details the narrator describes. The sound of a craftsman's tools, a gentle tapping of a hammer. The shaving of wood can be heard faintly in the background. So what were the secrets held within this timber? What made these ships so revolutionary? The primary secret lies in their unique construction. They were Imagine the hull, not as a rigid, solid shell, but as a series of overlapping planks, like scales on a fish. Each oak plank was split, not sawn, to follow the natural grain of the wood, making it incredibly strong. These planks were then overlapped and fastened together with iron rivets. This clinker technique created a hull that was both remarkably light for its size and astonishingly flexible. A longship did not fight the waves, it rode with them. In the violent swells of the North Sea, the hull could twist and flex, absorbing the immense energy of the water. This flexibility prevented the ship from being torn apart by the forces that would have broken a more rigid vessel. It was this strength and resilience that gave Norse sailors the confidence to leave the coastline behind and venture into the open ocean. The foundation of this structure was the keel, often hewn from a single, massive oak tree. The keel was the ship's backbone. It provided the immense longitudinal strength needed to support the mast and endure the stresses of the sea, while also giving the ship stability in the water. But it is the combination of this deep-sea capability with another feature that truly defined the longship's genius, its shallow draft. Despite being able to cross oceans, the ship's keel was so shallow that it could float in just a meter of water. This single detail explains the incredible reach of the Vikings. It meant they were not confined to deep harbors. They could sail up shallow rivers, deep into England, France, and Russia, appearing hundreds of miles inland to the astonishment of the local population. It also meant they could land anywhere. A long, sloping beach was a perfect harbor. The crew could run the ship right onto the sand, leap out, and launch a raid, or establish a camp within minutes. Power came from two sources. For long journeys, a single, large square sail, woven from heavy wool and coated in oils to make it water-resistant, harnessed the power of the wind. But when the wind died, or when speed and maneuverability were needed in a battle, the sail was lowered and the crew took to the oars. The image of a longship, its oar ports open, being driven through the water by the synchronized rhythm of its warrior crew, is the very picture of Viking power. You must try to imagine the psychological impact of this vessel. For a monk on the coast of Northumbria, or a farmer in Normandy, the first sight was a speck on the horizon. Then, as it grew closer, it resolved into a shape unlike any other. The high, curving prow, perhaps carved into the terrifying head of a dragon or a serpent. The rows of painted shields, mounted along the gunwales, flashing in the sun. It was a vessel that seemed to come from nowhere, a sea monster delivering a hardened crew to their doorstep with no warning. It was the physical embodiment of the Viking world. Swift, adaptable, and utterly relentless. It was the ship that built an age. The Longship, that powerful engine of the Viking age, did not belong to just anyone. It was the possession of a man of means and influence, a leader who could command the loyalty of a crew and finance such a venture. We return now to the settlement, but we step away from the farmer's humble dwelling and enter the great hall of the chief. The Jarl here. The rhythms of life are different. The struggle is not for sustenance, but for something more intangible and, in this world, far more valuable: power, loyalty, and a reputation that would echo in the sagas. The chieftain's longhouse was the heart of the community, larger, longer, and more solidly built than the surrounding farmsteads. It was a public space as much as a private home. In the center of the main hall, On a raised platform sat the high seat. This was the chieftain's throne, often flanked by intricately carved pillars. From this seat, he presided over the life of his domain. He did not live a life of leisures. Responsibilities were immense, but his hands were not calloused from the plow. They were calloused from the hilt of a sword, and accustomed to the weight of a silver armband. Imagine an evening feast in this great hall. The fire roars, casting a warm, flickering light on the faces of the chieftain's household and his personal retainers, his warrior band known as the Herd. The air is thick with the smell of roasting meat, strong ale, and woods. Unlike the farmer's meager porridge, the food here is plentiful. Great joints of pork and beef are passed down the long tables, and horns are kept full of mead, the sweet, fermented honey wine. But this is not just a meal. It is politics. The feast is the primary stage for the display of a chieftain's power and, more importantly, his generosity. A chieftain's authority rested on his ability to attract and keep loyal followers, and this was achieved through gift. As the scolds of court poets recite tales of heroic deeds, the Jarl moves among his men. To a warrior who fought bravely in the last raid, he gives a finely crafted sword. To another, a heavy silver ring, worn on the arm. These are not mere payments. They are public symbols of the bond between a lord and his men. A successful chieftain was known as a ringcover, a man who did not hoard his wealth but shared it to forge loyalty. In return for this generosity, his men gave him their allegiance, their counsel, and their strength in battle. The chieftain was also the chief legal authority. In a society without a centralized state or police force, disputes were settled at a local assembly, the Thing. Here, all free men could have their say, but it was the chieftain whose influence often swayed the outcome. He would listen to grievances, a land dispute between neighbors, accusations of theft, even murder, and, with the backing of other powerful families, would pass judgment and determine the appropriate compensation or punishment. His power was not absolute. It relied on his reputation for wisdom and fairness. A poor judgment could weaken his standing and embolden his rivals. From this great hall, the world was shaped. The chieftain and his most trusted advisors would gather around the fire on long winter night, planning the expeditions for the summer. They would weigh the options. Should they send a ship east, along the river routes into Russia, to trade furs and amber for silver, dirhams, and silk? Or should they risk a voyage west, to the rich and poorly defended monasteries of England, to seize wealth through force? These were complex strategic decisions, a balance of risk, reward, and rumor. The fate of the entire community, its prosperity or its ruin, rested on the wisdom of these plans laid in the smoky warmth of the longhouse. And at the center of this domestic world, holding a different but equally vital form of power, was the chieftain's wife. She was the manager of this vast and complex household. While the Jarl concerned himself with war and politics, she commanded the intricate internal economy of the estate. She oversaw the food stores, not just for her family, but for 100 retainers. She managed the household thralls, or slaves, directing the spinning, weaving, and production of all the cloth needed. The symbol of her authority was the set of keys that hung from a brooch on her dress, keys to the food chests, the storehouses, the locked coffers of treasure. She was the lady of the hall, the peace weaver, whose shrewd management and diplomatic skill were essential to maintaining the stability and prestige of her husband's domain. For everyone in this elite world, from the Jarl to his wife to his humblest warrior, life was a constant performance on a public stage. Everything was driven by the pursuit of honor and the fear of shame. A good name, a reputation for courage, generosity, and wisdom was the most precious commodity of all. It was this reputation that ensured your place in society, that guaranteed your followers' loyalty, and that, you hoped, would grant you a form of immortality. Your deeds remembered and retold in the sagas for generations to come, long after the fires of your longhouse had grown cold. Our journey through the world of the Norsemen is coming to an end. We have felt the chill of the spring soil in a farmer's field, a life of relentless, quiet struggle. We have sailed the cold gray ocean with a fiery-haired outlaw, seeking a new world on the edge of the map. We have marveled at the genius of the Longship, a vessel of both beauty and terror that carried an entire age on its flexible, clinker-built hull. And we have sat in the smoky warmth of a chieftain's hall, where power and reputation were forged in firelight and generosity. The world we have visited was a hard one. It was a life defined by a narrow margin of survival, by the ever-present realities of hunger, violence, and loss. And yet, it was also a world of incredible resilience, of profound artistry, of deep bonds of loyalty, and of a courageous, far-reaching spirit that left its mark across the globe. Now, it is time to let that world recede. Let the sagas fade back into silence. Let the ghosts of farmers and chieftains return to their rest. Feel the solid comfort of the present moment, the security of your room, the gentle weight of your blanket, the peace of the night. Their struggles are over, their voyages are done, and for you, all that remains is to drift, to let go of the day, and to sink into the deep, quiet, and well-earned calm of sleep. Rest now. Rest well.